turn it over to in a moment. My name is Carly. I'm the Membership and Communications Director at River Network, and I'll just be doing some kind of supporting work on the back end of this meeting today because we have our three experts here ready to share their knowledge and expertise with you all. But I'll just run through a few housekeeping items before we get started. So if you found the session through River Network, probably safe to assume that you're a member, but just in case this event found you through other means, you can join the network for free, and I will put the link in the chat here in a second. At River Network, we provide resources to advocates through publications and events, cohorts, and sessions like this. So make sure your membership is up to date. And also a heads up for this meeting, we will not be doing any breakout groups today, but we do recommend that you're prepared to do some writing and reflection as we're going through this presentation, especially if you're planning on joining us for part 2, which will be on February 5th, which is more of a kind of workshop-based exercise. So please take notes where you're prompted to, and you're also more than welcome to share those reflections in the chat as we go. And all that to say, camera on or off is totally up to you, but please keep yourself muted throughout. And we will have 15 minutes at the end of the session for questions. And you can also message me directly if you're having any issues with Zoom. And if you're just joining us now, I will throw a prompt in the chat for you. It's definitely not too late to share. Please keep these responses coming. Great to kind of see and check in with everyone this morning. Okay, and that's it for the housekeeping stuff. I'm going to kick it over to our speakers, two of whom, Hira and Kaustubh, you might have met at their session at River Rally in Grand Rapids in 2024. And today we have those two, and now Francesca, who will help us explore this kind of huge concept of equitable engagement. This has come up so often across the network, just this question of we want to engage communities affected by an issue and build real relationships and just be really collaborative in how we build solutions and what is the best approach there. And I've seen this presentation a few times, once at Rally and recently going through these new slides, and these folks here have really done the work to understand what builds this kind of trust and collaboration, but there's so much more we can learn together in this big group too here today, and also in our part 2 on February 5th. Okay, so without further ado, I will kick it over to our speakers.
Everyone, thank you so much for coming to the first of our 2-part series on equitable engagement. And Carly, if you can, next slide, thank you. So we would really like to thank Carly and the rest of the River Network team for helping us organize this event, and we really appreciate you all coming to spend your time with us today. Just a brief kind of overview of what we'll be discussing for the next hour. We'll be introducing you to the concept of equitable engagement and how it can help you and your organization to really achieve better outcomes for both the people and the ecosystem, climate, environmental challenges that you're hoping to address. The goal of this webinar is really to empower you to be what we call researchers of your own context. So when we think of research, we often think of it as this purely academic process, but as we found throughout the course of our project, which Hira will go into in the following slides, that research is really critical to informing the work of any type of organization, especially when it comes to working on environmental and climate issues that affect people on the ground. So being a researcher of your own context really allows you to develop informed, effective, and actionable plans that are tailored to the specific stakeholders who are invested in and affected by your organization's work. So using the strategies that we discussed today, we really hope you come away feeling empowered and ready to engage with communities in an authentic way and to identify steps to collaborate and make decisions with stakeholders. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here and listening more to our work and how you can really apply this to what you all are doing. My name is Hira. I am currently an ORISE Fellow at the Environmental Protection Agency in the Great Lakes National Program Office. My main focus is always environmental justice. I'm really interested in scientific communication and community-based participatory research. While I was doing my master's at the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability, I did my degree with a focus in environmental justice and conservation biology.
everyone. I'm Francesca Levithan. Pronouns are she, her. I'm a social scientist with a focus on community-based participatory research as a tool for really developing place-based adaptation and resilience initiatives for local organizations and local governments. Like Kira, I'm also a recent master's graduate from the School of Environment and Sustainability, where I focused my studies on environmental behavior, education and communication, and environmental justice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaustubh Simant. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm an environmental scientist, and my research interests lie in the confluence of water policy and management and social justice. I'm passionate about working towards fostering equitable solutions to issues surrounding water quality, access, and affordability. I also completed my master's degree from the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, where I focused on conservation ecology and environmental justice. Next slide, please.
All right, so before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge all the individuals who made our work possible, beginning with our client in Great Lakes Now. They're a regional media organization in the Great Lakes Basin, and they proposed a project that would help them produce environmental justice stories more equitably and with community interests at the forefront. Secondly, we'd like to thank advisor Dr. Mike Schreiberg, who has supported and encouraged us through all stages of this project. He is a steadfast advocate for all his students at the University of Michigan, so we'd like to thank him. I'd also like to acknowledge team members that couldn't be here today, Hannah and Madeline Riders, and also my co-presenters, Francesca and Kaustubh. This is our collective labor and the labor of all of our community and media partners who generously offered us time, expertise. Those who are listed here and those who chose not to be listed, we thank them for their time and their expertise. And then lastly, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Detroit Sustainability Clinic and the Cooperative Institute Lakes Research for their support in this project as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start this discussion with an understanding of the role of communication and storytelling in supporting community movement building. This is something that we felt was really critical to acknowledge, especially because approaching research with any kind of deficit mindset was not really how we intended to propose meaningful solutions. So our research team's primary two objectives are the first being understand the existing relationship between communities that are facing environmental justice issues and then media organizations that are covering their stories in the Great Lakes region. Our secondary objective was to identify areas where media organizations and others that are engaging with communities can more equitably tell environmental justice stories through a collaborative and reciprocal model. In order to accomplish those objectives, our team researched existing challenges in the field of community engagement and media fields, and we worked to better map and understand the existing resources for community engagement in environmental storytelling, in reporting, and identifying gaps that we saw within those. So we also worked a lot to better educate ourselves on emerging trends in those areas and just current discourse in the field, because we ourselves don't come from media or journalism backgrounds. And as a result, we identified, early on, because of our background, we needed to rely a lot on the expertise that's already abundant in the Great Lakes region. And because we're unfamiliar with the media landscape and the relationships between community environmental justice leaders and media organizations, we really needed to rely on those individuals to show us who did we need to talk to. And so in a media area, we went to school at the University of Michigan. So we were in Ann Arbor, and we started kind of from Ann Arbor to Detroit. And talk to environmental justice leaders in the area and ask them about media organizations that they've worked with previously, journalists that they know. And in this way, we kind of began to use this technique called snowball sampling, where each interview we did came out with a couple of names of individuals who they thought we'd talk to next. And that strategy over about a year and a half resulted in a total of 42 interviews conducted with 17 community organizations, 10 media organizations, 3 Great Lakes Now staff members, and then 12 journalism and community engagement experts. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to start this slide with a quote because of our contributors, and I love this one because it really drives the point home that environmental storytelling is a method of keeping communities safe. It's a method of keeping them informed and preserving their experiences so that others can better understand their struggles and their triumphs as well. And I wanted to reiterate, so while this project did focus a lot on media organizations and how they can kind of alter their approaches to minimizing harm and maximizing, positive impact to communities, I don't want to understate how critical environmental storytelling and equitable engagement is to all sectors of environmental work. I know we have a lot of individuals from a lot of different areas of environmental work, of scientific work, and whether that's research, education, policymaking, we do and we all need to build relationships with the individuals and communities that are facing the greatest environmental threats. So understanding their perspective and their stories as told by them is a really necessary step in that process of working towards meaningful solutions. So on the right here, we have a list of the findings that we basically produced through qualitative analysis of all of our interviews. And one of the gaps that we identified in our background research of the existing tools and recommendations is that very few of any of the tools for equitable engagement are rooted in the experience and recommendations of community leaders and advocates of environmental justice. So far too often, the tools for engagement rely on traditional definitions of experts or scholars. And as a result, they really fail to account for serious barriers to engagement and trust building that's rooted in the uniqueness of various different communities. So the findings that we have listed on the right side of the slide are really a product of that qualitative analysis from our interviews with community environmental justice leaders and local environmental reporters. So we've got quite a few findings there, but one of the more interesting findings that I like to bring up is the finding that came out of recommendations to utilize journalism and storytelling as a method of bolstering community change. I think that this is a really unique finding because a lot of the background research and traditional academic background talks about the negative relationships between media and local leaders and local communities. But I think this finding really reiterates that relationship is very important. It can be very positive, and we can utilize journalism and storytelling for supporting existing community change. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these findings, the background, how we did the qualitative analysis, we do have a link to our full report at the end of this presentation where you can download all of that and read through. But for now, I will go ahead and hand it over to Francesca.
So as Hira mentioned, we spoke with a lot of different groups as part of our project. And a key pattern that really emerged throughout these conversations is that while organizations felt really strongly about the importance and the value of community engagement as a concept, they felt that they lacked a concrete understanding of what this actually looks like in practice and how to actually implement this in an equitable and just way that served communities. So to start, I'd really like to just provide a framework for thinking about community engagement and how to do equitable community engagement, what that means, why it's important, and how it can help you and your organization achieve your goals in an effective way in partnership with community. So community engagement is an ongoing process. I like to think of it as a verb, not a noun. So it's something that you are doing over and over again. It's something that is an ongoing process that really allows you to gather critical information, establish trust with stakeholders, and ultimately create these conditions for collaboration that benefit everyone, your own organization and the stakeholders included. So when you are engaging with stakeholders, you're able to engage with folks who really have that lived experience, that local knowledge, to develop feasible and effective solutions to whatever environmental or climate challenge your organization is seeking to resolve. So meeting folks where they are, meeting with the folks who are closest to the problem to really gain these critical insights is something that is really a product of community engagement. When you are engaging communities in this way, when you're showing that you value and recognize the importance of their perspectives, that is a really important stepping stone to forming these relationships based on mutual trust and mutual respect. And so doing community engagement in this way can really help you to develop those positive, mutually beneficial relationships. And by including stakeholders throughout the decision-making process, you can cultivate community buy-in for whatever intervention or program you're seeking to ultimately implement. And this is really successful for the really essential for the success of any policy or intervention, is having that community support. So when we talk about community engagement, we're talking about gathering information, establishing trust. And so this really requires us to understand what prospective community partners want and need. And this looks really different depending on the context that you and your organization are working in. So by understanding the context through stakeholder engagement, you can develop policies and programs that are tailored to the unique people, the unique places, the ecosystems, the environments, and the socio-political conditions of the specific place that you're working in. And again, this is just really important, not only for developing positive community relationships, but for developing effective interactions and effective implementation of whatever program you're trying to put into place. So before we move on, I'd just like to touch on the title of this webinar, which is Moving at the Speed of Trust, and how this relates to community engagement. So the concept of moving at the speed of trust is actually something that came out of our interviews. This is a phrase that we heard multiple people say when they were discussing positive examples of relationships and interactions that they've had with external organizations. So it's really this idea of recognizing our position, oftentimes as outsiders that are entering communities we may not have pre-existing relationships with. So rather than just trying to barrel through a process to obtain whatever data or outcomes we're looking for, it's really about slowing that down and focusing on relationships first, and knowing that relationships build trust, which then allows the rest to fall into place. A really important, helpful principle for this is harm mitigation. So recognizing that while we cannot eliminate the risk of harm completely, we can take action to maximize benefits and reduce any harm that we may cause as outsiders going into communities as much as possible. Next slide, please. So in the back one. Thanks, Carly. So in the next section, we're going to discuss 4 key strategies that our team used during our project to support the community engagement process. We're going to be using our own personal experience as a case study, discussing a scenario we encountered during our research, how we implemented each strategy in practice, and then pose a discussion question to the group to kind of help you think about how to implement these in your own work. And you can feel free to answer those questions either on paper in front of you or in the chat. And Carly will be posting those in the chat as we go. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Francesca. So as Francesca mentioned, we're offering 4 key strategies. I'm going to start with the first one here. Define project goals and responsibilities. So in order to work towards exploring equitable solutions, our team took our responsibility very seriously to craft and implement equitable research methodologies. In order to make an equitable product, we really believed you have to start with equity in the research process. This often worked in conflict with traditional academic approaches to research. We were conducting this work within a university setting. So while our research was qualitative in nature, interviewing individuals, particularly those who've had bad experiences with academic researchers and media in the past, it really required us to put extra care into how we approached engagement. So as a result, before we began this project at all, our team designed a model with our goals for the project and our responsibilities in one circle. So that's depicted on the left, on the right here. And that made clear to us that our responsibilities and our eventual deliverables were equally important, and we couldn't achieve one without the other. So to kind of provide a little example, what we have here, our project goals, some of those included developing a comprehensive report on equity-driven media, producing a toolkit for equitable engagement, developing an implementation plan for our client, and generally promoting based journalism. And then on the right side of that circle are our project responsibilities. So these we decided as a team. They will look unique depending on your team, depending on your project. But ours were diverse representation. So we wanted to talk to as many different individuals from as many areas across the Great Lakes, from as many walks of life as we could. And then decolonize research methods was really important to us, again, coming from an academic institution. So this meant, as Francesca was discussing, concepts like working at the speed of trust, slowing down, not being so rigid, which often academic research precludes rigidity, but we really wanted to embrace flexibility in this process, prioritizing collaboration with each other, with the individuals at our school, with the individuals that we were collaborating with on this project. And then lastly, centering care and love was a really important responsibility for us as we were interacting with the individuals who are collaborating on this work, and also as we were interacting with each other. So this is just our little wheel and our tool. We revisited this many times throughout our project over the course of a year and a half. But this will look different for everyone, depending on the project, depending on the organization, the team. So on the left here, I have, if you'd like something to jot down notes or just down the questions to think about and reflect on later. The project goals are, again, what do you want to achieve? Those are the tangible kind of outcomes of an initiative or project. And then the project responsibilities are, what is your role as researchers? What is your role as practitioners? And often as non-community members, which people and what values are you accountable to? And so just keeping that at the forefront. So this is before designed, all the nitty gritty parts of this project. This is what we started with, and this is what we were accountable to throughout the process. So just thinking of your project goals and your responsibilities as that guiding framework for engagement. Next slide, please. So this is a opportunity for us to kind of go through what's a lesson, a challenge that we met throughout the process, and how did we kind of come up with a solution for that? How did we meet that challenge? Really based in kind of what I walked through in the last slide, which was defining those goals and responsibilities. So defining those goals and responsibilities at the onset of the project actually helped us a great deal when facing any challenge, but particularly this one, which was prioritizing accountability when facing conflict. So I'm going to start with a scenario that actually did happen in the course of our project. It was our client competing priorities in our project, in our research, the direction that we decided to take it, and also our client proposing a new initiative that they wanted to carry out. So our client decided that they wanted to, while we were engaging in this work, create an environmental justice podcast. And we had, I believe we had just wrapped up our interviews with all of the individuals that we talked to. And our client wanted to see if they could take our interview list, our contacts, and contact those individuals for this new project, which was the Environmental Justice Podcast. So what we really had to go back to was our initial responsibilities and kind of the cornerstones of this project, which included maintaining trust, our commitments to consent and privacy, and then also our project goals, and was to meet client expectations and have that relationship to eventually make those deliverables that we wanted to end the project with. So the solution in this case was a revisiting of our project goals and responsibilities, and what this resulted in was clear communication and revisiting those goals and responsibilities as a team. Now, what did that look like? It meant openness to the client. So what we did was, instead of jumping to conclusions, assumptions, we asked for a project proposal from our client. And then they gave us a presentation about all of the logistics of this EJ podcast. We asked questions, we practiced active listening. And then as a team, again, I'm reiterating the same thing because I just think it's so important, is we took time to, again, revisit those goals and responsibilities as a team and discuss them with our advisor as well. And then we came back to our client with humility. We presented our decision, which was that, based on our commitments, we didn't want to share our list of interviewees, our list of contacts across the Great Lakes for this initiative. And instead, our middle ground was to offer the name and contact information of the individual who was starting the initiative to our contacts, so that if they wanted to pursue that relationship and that initiative could on their end, but we weren't giving out any contact information on our end. So that's just a quick example of, how conflict can show up and how competing priorities between you and a larger organization, in this case, it was our client, but how those conflicts can come up and how best to mitigate them and stay committed and accountable to those responsibilities that you laid out. So again, this is a little guiding question to write down, to think about later if you want, but what strategies have you employed, either personally or as an organization, to deal with conflict between organizational goals and responsibilities? So I will go ahead and hand it over to Kaustubh, who's going to go into our second strategy.
Hey, thank you for that, Hira. Another strategy that worked for us was to utilize decolonized research methods with an emphasis on co-production. As Hira talked about earlier, as outsiders representing an academic institution, engaging with communities that have experienced past harm by both academic and mainstream institutions, we sought to decolonize our research methodology and approach, and it was important for our team to critically assess our positionality. We made it our responsibility to talk to and engage with as diverse and representative a set of individuals as possible, while committing to the principles of environmental justice and creating a body of work in collaboration with our contributors that directly serves their needs and priorities, but also provides value to a broad variety of users, especially the people that we seek to serve. So in order to do this, we started off with a small pool of interviewees from our contacts. Our advisor offered to connect us with a few of his connections, and through their generosity, we were able to leverage existing networks through snowball sampling, which Hira talked about earlier, where each person that we interviewed connected us with more resources and contacts. And at some point, this also meant taking a step back and expanding our sample size to engage with communities that we hadn't talked to yet, like queer voices, immigrant voices, religious institutions, disability groups, Asian American voices, and making a conscious effort to include these voices in our process as well. And throughout the interview process, it was important for us to start off with clear protocols for consent and reciprocity, which we will talk about in our later slides as well. And for our interviews, we created general templates for each stakeholder group, which we tailor to our interviewee and their organization. After coding our interview for overarching themes, we made sure to communicate our work to our interviewees every step of the way and to incorporate feedback whenever possible. This also included checking in with our interviewees, even when we didn't have anything any tangible update, and just checking in with them regularly to make sure that that they know that we're on the same page and to assure people that we're still listening. Lastly, we made sure to provide all of our final deliverables to our interviewees with the understanding that they have free access to all of our work on this and our toolkit for future use. Next slide, please, Carlos. As I talked a little bit on the previous slide, a scenario that we encountered with this project was to navigate interviews and conversations as outsiders representing academic institutions, coming into spaces where people and communities have experienced a lot of past harm by the same. And an important method that helped us talk to the number of people that we did, given our positionality and our time constraints, was snowball sampling. And it was it was important for us to recognize early on that the existing networks that exist between media organizations, community organizations, and community-led groups. And we wanted to come in to better understand these existing relationships so we as outsiders could see what these relationships look like from their perspective and avoid making any sort of assumptions of our own. We avoided depicting any or making any sort of assumptions or resorting to depicting solely negative relationships between media and community organizations, which is what we found extensively in literature and which is more of an academic sort of standpoint. And we also took things at a slow pace. We were reaching out hundreds of people sometimes every day, and we really had to take a step back and be cognizant of people's time and their capacity or lack thereof. And relying on our connections to connect us with more people helped us continue to build trust at each interaction. And this process also helped us realize that everyone was eventually part of a larger network. And this helped us understand what a collaborative relationship looks like, a lot of which went into our recommendations for our toolkit. So another question that we had for you all to take some time was, what are some strategies that you've utilized to successfully conduct outreach in a community where you did not initially have connection? Handing it over to Francesca for the next part.
Thanks, Gastrid. So the third strategy that we implemented throughout this project was really committing to non-extractive outreach and engagement practices. And when I say non-extractive, what I mean by that is practices that recognize, engage with, and incorporate the input and expertise of a community. So as we mentioned during a lot of our conversations, many community members described past interactions with external organizations and individuals as feeling really one-sided or even exploitative, and just ultimately feeling like they were not being given agency or power or really even transparency over how these interactions came to be, how the information that they were providing, the stories that they were sharing, which sometimes could be very personal and coming from a place of struggle or a place of challenge, how that information was actually going to be used, in what form, and all of this really amounting to a feeling of a lack of respect, feeling like community members were putting so much more into these interactions with outside organizations and not getting as much in return. And so for us, it was really important to try and implement as many practices as possible to avoid this. Again, going back to the harm mitigation principle, knowing that there is that potential for harm and trying to de-risk as much as possible by being really intentional with our protocols. So we implemented a variety of tools and practices to really prioritize clear, ongoing communication, both internally within our team, as well as externally with community members. So one of the ways that we did this was implementing a communication tracker and outreach protocols. So this really allowed us to logistically handle the amount of folks that we were connecting with without allowing people to fall through the cracks. It was really important to us that everyone that we communicated with, from the very first outreach email to scheduling an interview to sending follow-ups, all the way to inviting folks to our presentations, giving them access to our final deliverables. We wanted to ensure that folks felt cared for and attended to every step of the way. And so being really organized internally amongst ourselves, we were a team of 5, again, with hundreds of contacts. That was really critical to allowing us to develop those relationships from a logistical standpoint. We also implemented interview guides, which you can see here on the right. And these were really important for us to make sure that we were going into interviews providing as much information as possible to stakeholders from the very beginning and giving them as much power and agency as possible throughout that interaction. So you can see in this excerpt, and these again were scripts that we used for all of our interviews that were tailored for different stakeholder groups. But the common thread was providing a really solid explanation of the project, who our client was, how information gathered during the interview would be used both now and in the future. A really robust confidentiality protocol, so who has access to non-anonymized data, what will be done with that data after we're done analyzing it, and then a very explicit consent protocol. So asking for consent, reiterating that consent was an ongoing process, and that folks were welcome to stop an interview at any time, to ask us questions at any time, to not answer questions if they didn't feel comfortable, and then ending that kind of introductory part by providing folks with the opportunity to get clarification before we even started. So again, this just goes back to really centering that free, prior, and informed consent principle. And this really allowed us to prioritize that human-to-human connection. and engaging with people on a personal level by showing them that we cared, that they had all the information they needed to feel safe and to feel comfortable participating, rather than just treating them as data sources. Next slide, please. So a key lesson that we learned throughout this is flexibility is really the most important research protocol. So a common scenario that we had to figure out how to navigate was these pre-existing barriers to engagement. So because we work with such a diverse sample size, a very large diversity of organizations and individuals, everyone had different capacity levels, different communication styles, varying access to technology. And that was something that we had to contend with, as well as Kaustubh has mentioned, these kind of past negative experiences with researchers, which have led to some understandable hesitation for community groups when they're approached by folks affiliated with a university like we were. And so our solution to this challenge was to really empower community members to choose what worked best for them when it came to communication. So we offered multiple interview modalities, whether that was Zoom, phone call, in person, as requested by interviewees. We didn't make these interviews stringent in any way. They could be, we gave like a suggested amount of time, but if folks didn't have time for an hour interview, we could hop on the phone with them for 15 minutes if that's what worked for them. So really meeting them where they were. In the same vein, we also provided a variety of options for providing feedback to us, whether that was just sending us a voice memo, sending us an email if they didn't have time for follow-up. And then lastly, to minimize extractive engagement, we really sought to include participants throughout the entire research process. So consistently providing regular status updates, especially when it came to timelines. For example, our data analysis went a bit longer than anticipated. So being proactive, communicating that to folks, saying, hey, I know that you expected us to come back to you in November. We're actually having to move this to January because it's taking us a bit longer. So this is when to expect to hear from us. Let us know if you have any questions. So just being really transparent. And again, using their preferred mode of communication for those check-ins. And so by being flexible, you can really show that respect and give folks agency and meet them where they are. So one question that we have for you guys is, what barriers to engagement have you experienced and how did you adjust your approach as a result? Next slide, please.
Thanks, Francesca. So I just want to start off this slide by saying that reciprocity itself means different things to a lot of people, depending on their lived experiences, their professional relationships, and where they are in their professional journeys. And our team's understanding of reciprocity evolved and changed as we continue to have more conversations with our interviewees, peers, and within our team as well. And right at the start of our interview phase, we wanted to recognize the time, labor, and expertise of our interviewees, and we made a commitment early on to make donations to community-based organizations and grassroots leaders working on issues of social and environmental justice throughout the Great Lakes region, just as a token of our appreciation for the work that they do. Our interviewees were extremely gracious and generous with their time, resources, and contacts, facilitating introductions and interviews, and also providing important resources for our toolkit as we progress through the project. We were inspired by their magnanimity and their graciousness and offered to connect them with resources from our end whenever possible. And the conversations that we had with our interviewees pushed us to create a tangible resource that would not just help media organizations, but help uplift community voices, empower and bridge an important gap for EJ communities. Communicating our work every step of the way by sharing our drafts and incorporating feedback whenever possible helped us tremendously to create our toolkit in its final form. And this work would not have been possible without the help of our contributors. Lastly, I want to say that the response that we have received for our work and our toolkit has been really heartwarming and has given us the assurance that we needed. Next slide, please, Carly. So I talked a little bit about our understanding of reciprocity in the previous slide. And another scenario that we encountered with this project was a lot of people that we talked to operated within or had experiences that people that worked in structures that emphasized sort of a faster pace and a higher volume of stories. And from our interviews, we came to learn that more often than not, robust protocols for reciprocity and consent do not always exist in these spaces due to a number of barriers that we talked about in our previous slides as well. So reframing reciprocity outside of capitalism by focusing on developing mutually beneficial long-term relationships can be a great way to open doors for meaningful co-production and community participation. I do want to say that while our team did make donations to community organizations as a form of reciprocity, we viewed monetary gifts and donations as a standard for time recognition, and these were made to organizations solely as tokens of our appreciation. And this was our sort of way of saying we value not just your time and your help with this project, but the overall value and the important work that you do provides to the community. These were usually made after an interview was conducted, and these gifts were not disclosed before an interview or used for solicitation or participation in any way. We did not pretend to know where our gift might best be utilized and asked our collaborators at the conclusion of a project of our interview or in a follow-up what the best place was to direct these funds. And if they had a specific community-led initiative that they were passionate about or a youth engagement program that just kicked off or something in their organizations that they wanted the funds to be directed to, we made sure our donations went to the right place. We instead chose to focus on creating a long-term trust-based relationship as a form of expressing our gratitude by offering resources from our end and creating a form of knowledge sharing that went well beyond the project. So a final question that we had for you all was, what is something that you've employed to ensure reciprocity or mutual benefit when gathering community participation or knowledge in an initiative or a project?
So that is bringing us to the end, and we'll get to questions soon, but thank you so much again for being here and engaging with us. If you're interested in registering for part 2 of this series, the link is in this PowerPoint, which Carly will be sending out to participants. And you can also use this QR code to sign up. That will be taking place on February 5th, and we'll be walking you through how to use our team's toolkit to create a custom community engagement plan. So it'll be a bit more hands-on. Next slide, please. And just would like to finish by plugging our website with the link and QR code here. Here you can download our full report as well as our toolkit. And this will be, again, in the PowerPoint sent by email. And then on the right here is our contact information. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or just want to chat further about our work or community engagement in general. I'd also just like to shout out that Kaustubh and I are both currently exploring new opportunities. So if you know of any roles where skills can make an impact, we'd love to connect. But with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and just thank you so much again for being here today and for being interested in exploring community engagement with us.